So we're coming into, this is going to be our last panel of the day. All right, so most of you have already heard me talk a lot the last few days. So I'm not going to belabor the fact that I decided to take what I saw as whistleblower retaliation and put it into a book about how do we diagnose retaliation and PTSD. This is the flyer for my book. It's unfortunately expensive, but there are some discount codes for it. But I've been told you should have your library buy it and then just take it out of the library. And maybe eventually they'll take it out of circulation and you can buy it on the dollar book rack. But I put the book together to be an academic press release because I wanted it to be peer reviewed and editor reviewed so that when we take our cases to court, there is a legitimate source documented and approved by an academic that allows us to show damages for retaliation in the form of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and other mental health conditions. I think if you saw me talk yesterday, you saw I put up the chart about how I can look at these toxic tactics of retaliation and correlate them to words that are in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, text revision, 5th edition. All of that matters because it shows how we can work on claims for compensation for damages. So when a EAP counselor, employee assistance program counselor, very early on while I was still working at the Pentagon, told me I needed to write my narrative, I thought, oh yeah, that's a great form of therapy. I know what narrative therapy is. And I just started to document things. And it was through those documenting of things that turned into the checklist for the book. So I think there's a power that we take back when we own our narrative. And that's why I thought this panel was so important. Even though it's the last panel of the day, I think it's partly some of the most important of what we've been talking about when we've talked about how to own your narrative. So I'm going to turn this over to my fellow panelists because each one of them owns their narrative and they've done it in some different ways, by podcasting, TV, writing books, making a movie, running for Congress. All of this has been really important as ways to own your narrative. And I appreciated Denise saying that in the last panel. So I want to pass it along to them. And I don't know, Heidi Weber was supposed to join us online. And at some point, I'm hoping she will find her way online. But I'm going to just kind of go on down the line and ask John to tell us a little bit about his story and his TV show.
Thanks. Hi, I'm John Kiriakou. I was a CIA officer for 15 years, and I blew the whistle on the CIA's torture program back in December of 2007. Very, very difficult fallout from that, as you might imagine, including 23 months in a federal prison, which I wear on my sleeve as a badge of honor. But what I want to talk about is the media and whistleblowing. I had never spoken to a reporter before blowing the whistle on the torture program. And I almost did my whistleblowing accidentally. That's a separate story. But in the end, one of the things that my then wife told me, she was also a senior CIA officer when I did this, she said, you have to own this story. You have to keep talking about it over and over and over again, because eventually the CIA and the Justice Department are going to move on to their next victim. And they did. It was Ed Snowden. If you keep talking about it, your side of the story is going to be the side of record. And that's what's happened. I don't speak to my ex-wife anymore, but that still sticks in my mind as probably the best advice anybody has ever given me, because my side of the story did become the side of record. And I decided after being released from prison that I would continue to speak because I realized by then that I had a platform. Right before I went to prison, a few days before I went to prison, one of my lawyers said that she had received about 645 email inquiries from people saying, hey, would you let me know how John's doing once he gets to prison? So she had done this like a listserv. And she said, when you feel comfortable, just write to me and I'll send it to these 645 people. It took me about 6 weeks in prison, and I sent her a handwritten letter. She scanned the letter and sent it to the 645 people. I had no idea that one of the 645 was Arianna Huffington, who at the time owned the Huffington Post. She published this with a banner headline on the Huffington Post, and it went crazy. It got 2 million hits in just the first few days. And I ended up giving interviews in prison to Jake Tapper and to the Atlantic Monthly and Playboy and The Economist and the Young Turks and NPR. And it got to the point where the warden begged me to stop, which just made me keep going. And I ended up doing 14 of these letters over the course of 23 months. So when I got out of prison, I had this ready-made audience and decided that I would sort of make myself, if not a journalist, I don't consider myself to be a journalist. I consider myself to be a commentator or a host. And so I ended up with a radio show every day. I ended up with 2 syndicated columns, one at Covert Action Magazine and one at Consortium News. I write occasionally for the Los Angeles Times and the Washington Post. They have never turned me down. They publish everything I send them. And then a TV show called The Whistleblowers. So every week we speak to a different whistleblower or whistleblower attorney or somebody involved in the world of whistleblowing. And this thing, I will tell you, is not available in the United States on our broadcast channel. You can watch it online, but it's available in dozens of countries around the world. I happen to be in Cuba, of all places, in February, flipping through the channels, and there's my show in Cuba and in Greece, and last week in Spain and Germany, and other great places. I'm going to come back to the main point. The main point is not for me, it's for all of us. We have to keep talking about this over and over and over. Listening to these stories today, I felt like a bobblehead because I've experienced all of it. Everything that everybody has been talking about, I've experienced, or I've worked with people who have experienced it. Now, I mentioned a second ago that I had never spoken to a journalist until the day that I blew the whistle. But after I blew the whistle, and then after I was arrested, one of my 11 attorneys was the attorney that focused on media outreach. And what she told me was that we had to cultivate friendly members of the media, because if it was just screaming on Twitter, nobody was going to pay any attention. We had to get legitimate journalists who may be predisposed to our position or maybe willing to be educated on whistleblowing and what our position was, and have them get the story out. And so we did off-the-record interviews in the attorney's office with journalists from the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Huffington Post, and Politico. The Politico interview was a bad idea. It was no, but that's a good guess. That's a good guess. But the Post ran with it. The Times ran with it. And the Huffington Post put me on the cover of the magazine and really kept up the pressure to the point where the news outlets, which universally in the beginning called me CIA leaker John Kiriakou, then universally by 11 months later, called me CIA whistleblower, John Kiriakou. So the moral of the story is keep up the fight, because they won't. They'll walk away after a while. They'll give up. They'll focus on somebody else. So we have to focus on ourselves and make sure that the world knows that we're the good guys, and then just let them take it from there.
All right, I'm going to try to hold. And you know what? I'll double do it. I'll double do it. This is very awkward. Okay, sorry guys, I'm going to have to leave the live. I got it. So I asked about Politico, Mark's Caputo, because he's got a specific beef with me because I called him a sexist pig when he was being a sexist pig. And then got fired for fabricating a story about me. I have almost the opposite advice of him when it comes to dealing with the media, which a lot of people are surprised to hear, because I was literally called the darling of the media by the governor of Florida. I did CNN, MSNBC, Young Turks, Time, the Washington Post, New York Times, et cetera, et cetera. Even was a Cosmo girl. I was the March 2021 feature for Cosmopolitan magazine, which, believe me, as a scientist who studies climate change, was surprising no one more than me. And it was the first time I had ever had professional photos taken of me, was for Cosmo. Fun times. I had almost too much media exposure. And I actually had a degree with a dual major in journalism. So I was, if any, more positioned, I guess, than most to handle media attention. I took every interview I ever was asked for, except for 2 Russian and Chinese state media. I told them to get lost. And I don't know that I would say I regret it, but I was 30 years old. I could have handled it better. And when you make mistakes that are on live television, you can't exactly take that back. Haven't found a way to turn it into a profitable career yet, because you need more than just a platform who you share your story with. Like you said, Politico was a bad idea. There are some reporters that I know from previous experience and by reputation that I will never, ever work with. Mark Caputo is trash, and there's a reason he got fired from MSNBC. Some I'd swear my life on. Chris Cuomo is one of them. So knowing who is to trust is a very hard thing to do when you're just thrown in there. And I had degrees in journalism, so I should have known better. Once your story's out there, it's not yours anymore. That's it. You're trusting other people to tell your story. Journalists are not there to work for you. They're there to report on what you tell them and then what the other side tells them. And they will balance those views regardless of how unbalanced they are in the truth. I happen to take on a very powerful governor who wants to be president. And he has not yet or let it go. I'm waiting for that day to happen. We just entered mediation Tuesday. And they basically told us we kind of want to see if he drops out or not before we start negotiating numbers. And I was like, he's not even a named defendant in this case. Why does that even matter? But that's how it is when you take powerful people. And they will use the media equally to come after you. I mean, Nixon was the one, famously said, kill him in the press about Dan Ellsberg, and ransacked the psychiatrist's office, trying to make him seem crazy in the press, tried to poison him with LSD before he did a major speech so that he'd have some kind of reaction on stage and the whole world would see it. And I thought this whole experience was crazy because someone actually did poison me at one point. And I would always have Dan there to remind me that it's not crazy. It's been done before. There's a playbook. My advice to people who are whistleblowers or who think they want to be whistleblowers is to connect with other ones. I did not do that. I was not a part of this community. I was a state scientist who was managing 268 people for $49,999 a year with an advanced master's degree in science and all my PhD coursework done, because they wouldn't round it up to 50 because that put me in the overtime bracket. So that's what you should do first, because we have networks of journalists we trust to do your story fairly. And you need to really accept that once it's out there, it's out of your control. I think that's the expectation. Everyone looks at me or him and thinks, God, if I could just get my story into the popular press, it would go viral. It's not always a good thing. It comes with serious drawbacks. The raid of my house, I think it got 12 million views on Twitter in the first day. And yeah, I did a round of press for it. But when I stepped back from it, I don't know that that was the right play. I should have been more careful. I should have been smarter, more mature. Again, I was 30. I missed 30 under 30 by a month and was put into 40 under 40, which is fine. But I decided to trust one person to tell the ultimate narrative. And that's my very good friend, Josh Fox. He's a documentarian. He's been nominated for the Oscar. He's won the Emmy. I've known him since before I was famous. So that helps. And do we have the preview of that up by chance? Yeah, if you just Google Rebekah Jones Kickstarter, it should come up. But after that story is told, I'm out. I'm done. Being a public person is not easy. Every single facet of your life is dissected. It's disputed, especially if you're a female. People will call you a whore. I've been called a whore more times than I can remember. Actually, I was sharing an email I got this morning that says something along the lines of, shame on you for lying on DeSantis, you woke tard cunt. You should be hung. But that's just Tuesday. And it's been yeah. Well, I'm just saying, like, it can happen any day. It's just a regular day. And it's been 3.5 years. And there's nothing I can do to stop that. And that's the sad truth. If you become a public figure in this common era, unfortunately, that means taking a lot of abuse and vile abuse. And that's actually kind of tame for what I normally get. One of DeSantis's people has tweeted about me 250,000 times in 2 years. And there's nothing I can do about it. So be careful with who you trust your stories with. I prefer, after all of this time, long form. Make sure your story is told by someone you trust and in the format and medium that it deserves. Not everybody can do live TV, and that's fine. And nobody can just be expected to go on a camera and primetime Chris Cuomo for their first interview ever in their life and nail it. But don't just rush to the press. Please be careful. Because I know plenty of people who are going through things right now who made the mistake of going straight to the press, and the press turned out not to be the thing that would fix everything for them. That is, limelight's not fun. And you still end up broke and without a job and all of the other whistleblower things that we have to deal with. But now everybody knows who you are. And that's hard, but I know they're pulling up the preview for the movie. It's going to premiere at Sundance in January. And I'm contractually obligated to fulfill my publicity tour from that film so that I can eat in the next few months. And after that, I'm out. I don't want to be a public person. I don't like it. I never liked it. It was a necessity so that people didn't die. If you don't know my story, I'm the Florida COVID whistleblower who was in charge of data and surveillance for the first 6 months of the pandemic. And I was fired for refusing to manipulate data when the state decided to prematurely reopen and killed thousands of people, which is exactly what I told them was going to happen. I was later obviously raided at gunpoint on orders of Governor DeSantis personally. He then attacked me at a conference the next day and defended the Gestapo and has been obsessively trying to attack me ever since. And he's used the press to do it. He's used social media to do it. Don't go on Twitter either. Don't ever read the comments. It's hard. But do we have the preview up yet? Oh. All right. Well, I hate the sound of my own voice, so let's try it because it tells my story much better than I could anyways. He come for me.
You knew the governor was going to come for you one day.
Yeah.
Police, search warrant, open the door.
There are a lot of police outside right now at my house.
She is not the chief architect of our web portal. That is another false statement. You'd think that would be the end of it. Obviously, she's got issues.
If we're not getting fully accurate data, then the concern is that we're making decisions based on politics.
The report, Rebekah Jones.
Rebekah Jones.
Rebekah Jones.
Rebekah Jones.
Rebekah Jones.
Rebekah Jones, the woman at the center of it all, might face prison time.
Became famous because you pushed a coronavirus conspiracy theory.
Terminated for insubordination in May.
She's not a data scientist.
What you're alleging are a very serious crime. Officers were in your home
charged with breaking into their computer.
Jones is accused of hacking into Florida's emergency alert system.
Now, Jones could face 5 years in prison if she's charged.
Your agents executed a search warrant on her home earlier this month. Officers were in your home charged with breaking.
The simple question is, what exactly were you asked to do that was so unusual and improper and, in your opinion, wrong?
So I'm going to go down before they do something and turn myself in.
At the end of the day, I've shown in Florida an ability to win huge swaths of voters that Republicans typically can't win, while also delivering the boldest agenda anywhere in the country. As I said yesterday, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Florida was a refuge of sanity when the world went mad. We stood as a citadel of freedom for people across this country and indeed across the world.
Police, come down now!
Children!
And I will never let them get away with what they did to my kids.
And I will be able to destroy leftism in this country and leave woke ideology on the dustbin of history.
I look beautiful?
So as you can see, it's a very intense project. We've been working on it for years. We just finished the funding for it. We went way over budget. It was originally $2 million, but if I could go back and do it all again, I'd only tell my story like this. I wouldn't have done any of the other stuff. Maybe Cosmo, because then I can say for the rest of my life that I was a Cosmo girl, which is never a thing. I was not the girl who dreamed of doing that as a kid. I was the girl who wanted to be on rocket ships. So it was awkward and amazing at the same time. They also have the best fact checkers I've ever worked with in my life. Really rigorous, really thorough. Like they wanted to see my whole inbox. And I was like, sure, why not? I'd only do that. Because while it might seem like you're going to be picked up, you're going to get praise, there is something dark that comes with that. Every accolade that you get, every award that you win. I was named Forbes' Tech Person of the Year in 2020. Elon Musk still hates me for it, even though I didn't ask for it. That comes with pain. That comes with not being able to share your life like most people on Facebook. Like I can't tag my sisters or my mom because I know that then they'll start to get harassed. Part of that video captures when a veteran who was going through hell with the VA system collapsed and had a panic attack and had to be rushed to the hospital. And during my congressional campaign, I disagree with the run for something thing as well. We're not all built to withstand this kind of, I don't know what the word is. Stress seems to undersell it. Relentless
trauma you're subjected to.
Yes, terrorism. It feels like digital terrorism. And it's a really hard thing. I know even people within this community are like, oh, can you share my thing because you have so many followers? But there comes a cost with that. Your privacy is gone. Your career is gone. No one will ever treat you the same ever again. You're a thing. You're a shiny thing that draws attention. And that changes life. Now with men, this might not be as big as a problem. Sorry, no offense. Actually, some offense. It's a lot easier for y'all. I have to do all this every time I'm in public, and it's a pain in the ass, and my hair is bleached, and so it gets fried at the ends if I keep doing it, and then it's a mess. But when we're talking about the topic of owning your narrative, you don't own it. You never will. It's a fallacy. You can tell it and hope that people do fairly, but expect that they won't. And then you'll be nothing but pleasantly surprised if they do. But it won't last. No media attention ever lasts. I'm like a weird unicorn. Edward Snowden's a weird unicorn. We're still here and we shouldn't be. But it's only because you serve someone's vendetta. I became a liberal fire rod, and everybody hates DeSantis now, even the Republicans, thank God. And so I'm used as a way to target him. But even that side of people, they don't legitimately care. Because if they did, they would have by now given me the one thing I keep asking for, and that's a job. So I think someone earlier said, they'll all tell you they'll help you. They'll all tell you that they'll get you money. But until, a check's in hand, I wouldn't trust that either. I'm kind of a cautionary tale, I guess, at this point. 2 years ago, if I would have been here, I'd be like, yes, whistleblowing is awesome. You should tell everybody everything all the time. I had all the data. I had all the testimony. I mean, I was in charge of the data. I made the data. So I had everything to prove it, and it didn't matter. That is the hard truth of the media landscape today. And maybe you're different. I'm sure you're different because you went to jail. So you just, I did too for a night. That changes you, but don't just run out there with everything on the line, because people will take advantage of you and then they'll discard you and they'll toss you to the side. And you won't know why. You'll never get answers. And it's a dangerous landscape. So just be careful. And if you need help, I'm here. I don't like this platform, but I still use it for anybody who needs it. So feel free to ask me to share your stories, and I will, if that's what you wish. I'll just don't ever work with Mark Caputo. I'll end it there.
Or Josh Christine.
Or Jake Tapper. I don't want to piss off CNN that much, so I won't go into that one. Oh, God. I did an interview with Jake Tapper once that we filmed in March of 2022 about my whistleblower complaint. He aired it 5 months later and framed it as if we were talking about my congressional run, which did not exist at that time. I didn't even decide to run until May. And so I won't curse at a public event. Thank you.
Well, that was very powerful. And no, seriously, I want to thank you both. And as important as it is to own your narrative and share it, I think in the balance of things, what Rebekah shared is very important too, because that's the informed consent part of all of this, because you don't really know what you're getting into until you're in it. And then from her lessons learned, you've got to, I think that was very poignant, the kinds of things to expect. And so you can be prepared for it should you choose to do it. And some people choose not to, and that's okay too. And I think we've all heard enough these last couple of days why that's relevant as well. For me, as part of owning my narrative, I was told, well, Ted, you should write a book. And I'm thinking, no, I don't really feel like writing a book. And if I did, why would how am I going to write a book about, what am I going to say? And, is it going to be beneficial to anybody? And so I was pretty serious about the fact if I was going to do it, it would have to benefit the public or the cause that I was fighting for in some way. And so eventually I did decide, as many of you have already seen, broken promises and what I've been fighting for in the VA. And I wanted to take some time to explain why I wrote the book as part of owning your narrative, because I think Catherine from the previous panel had a good point about that. It's important. These stories do have a history. They do have a record. And like hers, mine's in the Library of Congress as well. And so in terms of what evolved for me in the process is, of course, number one, I wanted people to know what was going on in the public to raise awareness about the issue, about the excessive unethical metrics clinically wise that were being forced on counselors in their performance. What it did is it compromised quality care for veterans because it was burning out counselors, and they had to make the the ethical choice between providing quality care or producing the numbers the VA wanted. And this is a serious problem. And so I wanted to raise awareness about that, to inspire corrective action in any way people could support that effort by going to their senators, congresspeople, to support the effort and the legislative efforts that eventually came out of it, as you all are aware of at this point. And at this juncture, the focus is to ensure the VA complies with the legislation. Just because the bill was passed doesn't mean they're going to comply with it. So as time moved on, I also realized, as I'm in the process of writing the book, boy, was it therapeutic. It was definitely therapeutic, and it was a healing process. It was like, you go through things. You heard a lot about journaling as part of the therapeutic process and how helpful that can be. And I've talked with some of you that have done just that. And so the process of doing that was like journaling. It was very, very healing. But one of the other things I wanted to do, and one of the main things we've talked about these last 2 days, the toxic retaliation tactics that have been used against us, and the serious impact it has. And I went very personal into the tactics used against me, and very viscerally the impact it had on me, my family, and other psychosocial networks and colleagues, two of which stood up for me, surprisingly enough, where I was at, which was instrumental in getting the support I needed along the way. But I wanted people to know what's really going on when people speak truth to power. The public doesn't really know. They don't understand what we go through when we stand up for our causes and try to do the right thing for the right reason, and the backlash we get. They don't really have a clue. That story needs to be told. And the other thing I tried to do was leave things on a note of hope at the end, because I was fortunate enough that I had success in my cause, where congressional legislation was finally passed into law this past December, supporting all the issues I had brought up. And they even let me edit the bill before it went on the floor for a vote. So that was a good thing. But, I never got any vindication for the retaliation. Most of us have not. We've heard these stories the last 2 days. And but at least where it really mattered and why I did what I did to begin with, I consider that, a major win, and that's a good thing. And so I wanted people to know, in telling the story also, that, there are times that David can beat Goliath. It can happen. It's not all for naught. Sometimes those kinds of things do end up with a favorable outcome. And one of the other things I addressed was the importance of certain elements you want to make sure that you employ based on my lessons learned, that's going to allow maximum effectiveness to have the most favorable outcome possible when you take these kinds of causes on and do what you have to do to do the right thing, to get the corrective action with the things you've identified that are wrong, that need to be corrected. So I think for whistleblowers, those are very poignant points based on my lessons learned. I don't have time to get into that now, but basically it addresses the kinds of things and a blueprint to follow that will help one in that process should they choose to do that. The last reason I did what I did in writing the book was I wanted to have people, especially whistleblowers and counselors still in the VA system, to be aware of resources that are available to them. I dedicated one whole chapter to Whistleblowers of America, and what they can do, and the website information and whatnot, and what Whistleblowers of America stands for, the things they offer to get that word out too, because a lot of people aren't aware it even existed. I didn't. I went headlong into what I did up front, being the tip of the spear, being the good Marine that I am, and got my ass kicked, because I didn't develop a network of support. I didn't even know where to begin, let alone my self-care. which was trashed. I had from the anger and depression I suffered from early on at the beginning of all this. I almost died from an embolism. I'm even lucky to be here. So self-care is very important. And this is the last point I want to make, and I didn't have time to get into it in the book. It was kind of off topic for the purpose of why I wrote what I wrote. Probably a topic for another book, but it has to do with self-care. Just give me a moment, please. When I was down here a month ago at National Whistleblower Day and heard some keynote speakers, some of which had been whistleblowers for 20 years, and the visceral reactions they were having in the middle of their talks. And some of you over the last 2 days who have been on panels, and a number of you that I've spoke to one-on-one. Wow. There's a lot of us that have not dealt with the trauma that we've been exposed to. That's really, hurt us very, very deeply. It's hurt our families. It's had, devastating impacts in many different ways. We've heard over the last 2 days. And there's resources for that as well. And I dedicate a chapter in my book because of this to PTSD, to treatment. And I even offer, because one of the things I expound upon is energetic therapeutic interventions that are the cutting edge of dealing with trauma, that basically can be very beneficial in a short period of time with longer lasting results than other conventional therapies that are out there. And my purpose in pointing all of that out with research to back it up, because it is evidence-based, again, was twofold. Number one, to let people be aware that it even exists, but also calling out the VA. How dare you for not having these interventions available to veterans in the VA? How dare you? And I cite two internationally renowned researchers and practitioners in this field who went to Congress, who testified before Congress, and had congressmen back them up. And I have, letters from them that they gave me showing what they wrote to the VA secretary, who blew it off and never did anything to try to get these interventions in the VA. It's really tragic. The other reason I mentioned it is, again, so people can be aware that it exists, not just for, counselors in the system at the VA. They're going through these struggles that in part I was trying to defend, but also for all of you, for all whistleblowers that are out there, to be aware there is something that you can do. There's, again, hope there. You don't have to carry this with you left unattended for the rest of your life. You don't have to. And so, what I'd like to do, if you want to, those of you that are interested, if you want to write this down, another organization I'm part of is called the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology. The Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, ACEP is the acronym, ACEP. They have a website. It's www.energypsych.org. I also mentioned the website in my book in chapter 10. That website is incredible because it not only talks about these interventions in dealing with PTSD that are really the cutting edge in dealing with trauma. They have a research tab that shows you all the studies that back all this up. They have in the resources section a section for what do they call it? Resources for resilience. that actually have for 5 different categories: depression, anxiety, anger, whatever it may be, is components of PTSD. They have 5 sections, each of which have 3 videos that you can follow through with these techniques and learn. And then if you want to download a PDF file, line by line, that shows exactly what was done in the video, I mean, that's something that you can effectively use to manage and regulate things that come up. And beyond that, for things that are more complex, they have a tab in the menu bar for find a practitioner, people that have been certified by this organization to use these interventions for people suffering from PTSD or depression or anxiety or other kinds of things that they're trying to deal with. And so you can locate a practitioner that's closest to you in your region, should you want. And so I just throw that out there to all of you to check out. It's really worth your while. It's been very beneficial for me. I've used it for veterans before I left the VA as a counselor, and I had tremendous results with veterans. And I don't really, do I have time just to maybe mention one? Okay, I just want to make sure. And I'll just give you one example. I had a Vietnam veteran that at that time had come back from Vietnam. Every night for 45 years, he woke up from night terrors soaking wet, anxiety medication out the wazoo. And at that point, I'd been seeing him monthly. And after 7 months, which is 7 sessions with him and I had him do stuff in between. I use these various interventions, like emotional freedom techniques or thought field therapy. Some of you might be familiar with that, but again, it's all on their website. And basically, it's a way of processing trauma that's stored in the body because that's where it is. And unless you somatically deal with it, you're not really going to clear it. And all medication is going to do is going to just basically suppress symptoms because you're not really dealing with what's going on at the level of cause. But when you have a means by which, and I'll just keep it real short, these techniques are kind of like, you've heard of tapping and so on. It's kind of like acupuncture without the needles, because you're stimulating acupoints in the body associated with vital organs and where things are stored at the cellular level of the body. And you're actually, through the vagus nerve, when you're doing this stuff and going through this protocol, you're actually sending messages where these things are stored, and it's getting cleared, and it's evidence-based. And they have MRI studies to show the before and after results of this stuff. So it works. So just to give you a little background. So this gentleman, after our time, those 7 months, I had seen him even for 3 or 4 years after that, just kind of booster type stuff, never had another episode of nightmares, and he was able to cut back on his medication and just some of it just on an as-need basis. And about 7 months later, he watched some war movies, some things got triggered, and for maybe about a 2-week period, he had some nightmares, but it wasn't as intense and it wasn't every night, and he didn't wake up in sweats. So we did some booster stuff around that. I just kind of point that out just to give like one example of how this can be. The experience is different for everybody. Not all sizes fit all, but it's just important also for all of us to be aware of that, because you've got to take care of yourself, and you deserve that. Your families deserve that, because they suffer from secondary trauma if you're not dealing with your own stuff in all of this. It's very, very important. So I highly encourage you all to check that out. It's something that I think can be beneficial. And I think that's a wrap for me.
Yes, I want to thank you all. I think so Rebekah made some really good points. that I'd like to just clarify, that if you're going to work with the media, really know your strategy for that. I was lucky in that I've had some media training as a federal employee and kind of knew the difference about like when you say something's on background or off the record. But I had one media source kind of burn me too. That was Mother Jones. Yeah, shame on them. I was shocked. But you know, they're gonna ask for comments from the other side, or they're gonna tell them they're even writing the story. I worked on one story. It was going to be a 4,000 word article in, I think it was The Nation. I can't even remember which the magazine was. And when they went to interview the perpetrators, she got them to kill the story. So after 2 years of developing it, the editors got a lawyer's letter and they wouldn't publish it. So, I mean, these things happen when working with media and journalism. They are not your friends. They may be very nice, like John is a sweetheart, but at the end of the day, it's, as Rebekah said, it's they're going to do the story, but then they don't really need to hear from you 10 more times to tell them, oh, you should follow up. And then this happened and that happened and this happened and that happened. It's usually a one and done. They've told your story, and unless something really new or interesting has happened, they are not your friends. They don't want to become your pen pal. You can't overreach on some of this. So, I mean, those are some of the things I would be cautionary about. And of course, if you have an attorney, we want you to have your attorney give you permission to work with I see the hand went up. Richard, is that what you? Yeah.
I hid actually for 5 days in a hotel. Like I knew if people fuzzy big hats came that I was going to fall out of windows.
So I mean, it's just really critical if you're not in a imminent media situation where something is happening, like the breaking down your door. You really need to have the guide, because you can't be your own best, like you can't be your own doctor, you can't be your own lawyer. You really can't be your own guide. You need someone there to help you. And when we do cases with Whistleblower, we have a communication that works with us, help handle exactly this situation. Who's the proper, the best person doing long-form media on this topic that you want to have address the story? Who's the best in the video part of it? Who's the best online? You really try to be very, very careful, and then work in very incremental ways to get the story positioned the way you like it to. It doesn't always work, but
no.
Yeah, and even when your story is told right and done well, and everybody agrees that the person you're blowing the whistle on is a bad guy, if they're powerful, which is usually what happens when you have someone come after you, they're still going to manage to get fluff pieces done, profiles in major outlets. The one that comes to mind is Elizabeth Holmes. She was the CEO of Theranos, and she tortured Tyler and Emily and the other people who came forward about fraud. And right before she was sentenced to prison for 11 years, the New York Times wrote a fluff profile on her and how she turned a new leaf. So even when everybody in the world agrees this person is a monster, you can still expect the New York Times, especially, to write a glowing profile of all the things that your monster has learned. And so you really do need to be careful. There are crisis communication teams. Somebody offered to put me in touch with one. I was like, nah, I got it. Did not have it. But I did learn one other important thing. Get there first. That is such an important rule. I did not appreciate that until my third round of wondering why all of a sudden I was being targeted with these hit campaigns at a specific time. And then 2 weeks later, something would break and it'd be in my favor. It's to poison the story ahead of time. So 2 weeks before I got whistleblower legal protection in the state of Florida, which I never thought I was going to get, the National Review wrote a story literally calling me the whistleblower who wasn't 2 weeks before. The IG report was leaked to Mark Caputo, who fabricated a story about it 1 week before the Florida Auditor General released an investigation saying that the state of Florida undercounted cases and deaths by thousands while they were under my management. So every time they were one step ahead. The only time I ever beat them was when they took my son. They took my son, 13 years old, charged him with felony threats of terrorism for sharing memes that were critical of cops in Uvalde, a case that he is still dealing with and has his next court hearing for in a month. I beat him to it. I commanded the story. Frankly, it doesn't matter who is right. It's who's there first. And so make sure that you're not leaving a vacuum. If people are going to fight over you, have a voice there, whether it's a surrogate, whether it's your attorneys, whether it's, somebody who's good with media, or if it's you with your attorney's permission, be a voice to defend yourself. And nobody else is going to do it. And I think that's really important too.
To some extent, I hear people say, get an attorney. They're $500 okay.
Get a free one like I did. Pro bono work.
I don't want to use Supreme Court 4 times and then I'm pro se or else so my kids are going to college and I'm fine. But, hire an attorney, take up your offense. There's no pain or suffering for federal employees, so they won't go like a pension saver. You're aware. And then if you prevail, they will still fight for years before you get your attorney's fees back. And thank you much for the taxes. So there is no perfect answer. I'm just saying, hire an attorney. They're not saying it's $500 an hour.
I didn't say hire, I said get. So my attorney has been working without pay for the last 3 years. He was the director of the ACLU of Florida for 25 years before that. The ACLU, there's other groups and organizations who will take your case pro bono. My case, there's no real money to be made because I'm a state employee. We have a bad judge and punitive damages. Even if they gave me 20 million, she can just be like, oh, that's an overdue burden and all this, and just basically erase it in the state of Florida. But there were lives on the line. And for that reason, they took it. Not all lawyers are evil. Mine are really great. So just you can, through the network, if you go to somebody and they're like, look, I'm going to charge you $500. You're like, look, I have $20 in my bank account. They might refer you to someone who will hear you out for free. Just
the senior was called. You get monetized. Okay, not all of us, but some of us get monetized, which is one reason I'm all whistle against OSC and NDAs, because they would protect us from the government. And people taking part out of not to be protected from the government. Okay, it shouldn't be me blowing whistles at OSC and then only it should have been lawyers, it should have been whistleblower advocacy groups, it should have been others decades ago.
But sometimes those choices are taken from us. Like I said, I was in hiding. I didn't say anything to the press. DeSantis decided to name me on live television in front of the vice president as the anonymous whistleblower. And after that, there was no putting that genie back. So not all of us have a choice.
But, if you look at the whole chain of events that led to you, there's other wrongdoing that helps set the context. Okay. Yeah. So it's not just get my point.
Yeah.
Sorry. And then all right, did you want to?
Yes, so very interesting actually, American legal justice system about the freedom of expression of speech that you are very passionate about here. That will protect, I think, constitutional protection. Now, in Europe, we have the freedom of expression of speech on one hand, then we have the defamation taken along as. So there's a conflict there, and we try to get a balance because, and John knows my story very well. In South Africa, I was burned as a whistleblower by the media. When I was in Greece and I was a witness for the prosecution authority of South Africa, I'm in Greece. Okay? I was supposed to be protected by the EU law, but I didn't. And then that advised me to shut my mouth, not talk to the media, because I would jeopardize the case, which lasted 6 years. So for 6 years, I couldn't talk to the media in South Africa. Couldn't grab a pen and go to South Africa, they would kill me. So I sit there and every day I was horrified with my family to open the goddamn phone or laptop and see what rubbish those guys will fabricate the characters narrative of fake news. Now, if that happened in Europe, there was arrested the journalists who wrote fake news media. They were arrested, put in jail, 24 hours, locked up. Okay? And also, I was watching, I was reading Facebook, and I was a son of a bitch, I was a public, I was this and that, everything. In Greece, it did. Rebekah, and you said there were some terrible things written on emails. In Europe, if I send a hate speech email, call the phone line, and the cybersecurity police, that they will trace that mail, and this guy can get arrested. Rather than that,
I live in the wrong country.
If my wife is called sorry, I'm not saying you say they can. Sorry, you said it, okay?
My Tuesday.
That person's going to get arrested. Yes.
Not in this country. No.
It's arrested because hate speech is protected by the EU law that Greece adopted in all the countries. So I'm surprised that you don't have a law. So anybody can swear at you, send you an email and say, I'm going to kill you, blow your brains. So.
Technically, a threat, a direct threat is supposed to be arrested. But if it's you should be hung, because I'm going to report that one. They won't do anything because it does not state a plan or the actual intent to hang me. Someone called and left a voicemail on my husband's cell phone that literally said, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your whole family. You're going to die, motherfucker. And the FBI did not prosecute him because they said they couldn't take it seriously because apparently he called somebody else and said that too. So apparently the more people that you threaten, the less serious your threat is. Therefore, you can get away with it. But
she's not going to have a swear that they can swear at you, but there's no limitation. No. That's a freedom of expression decision stage, correct?
Yes. It's absolute.
So,
I was running for Congress when this happened. They did nothing.
I'm thinking real quickly, I'm sorry to interrupt you. That reporter even called me and asked me to trash Ari. That's how desperate they were to do it.
Zach Paul is African. Yes. And eventually, of course, apologize by going to the office. So what I did is, and I'm not taking more time, I stayed for 6 years, let him publish life. Because of publish life. And when it gets finished, then I just took the whole one by one. And I just thought, okay, what's your evidence? And I exposed them. So I'm thinking about the media, what you had and what I had was a little different. So I didn't go to the media, I let them, speak about me. I never have a right of reply. Okay, they never give me a right of reply. And then I end up going to the media on my own after the fact.
Well, anonymity can be dangerous too, because if you look at Reality Winner, she spent 5 years in prison because she trusted a journalist at The Intercept. And, I also know whistleblowers who initially had the privilege of being anonymous and had to watch their own friends debate about whether or not this anonymous source was full of shit or not right in front of them. And they felt powerless. They were like, this was Tyler Schultz, actually, from Theranos. He was listening to his own friends fight about whether or not him, without them knowing it was him, was telling the truth. And he decided that it was best to be quiet. And so he never said anything. Eventually, he stepped forward and identified himself. But I totally get how frustrating it is to watch people publish lies about you. But sometimes coming out and combating them doesn't work either. Sometimes it makes it worse. Trust me, I've tried.
Best news was a Greek businessman who lives in Africa. And, hello, I'm exposed. Greek businessman, who's up. Sorry.
Yeah, like this poor lady, Tanisha, but just real quick, John, I just wanted to, first of all, say I appreciate you. I've used you in some of my homeland security and counterterrorism courses, and you will be in the course that I'm teaching this semester.
Thank you very much for that.
To provide balance to that subject matter. My question is, what happens if either you think your story is not compelling or there's an NDA?
An NDA. That's a good question.
Because sometimes you hear so many stories and it's, how is my story different?
Yeah.
And then it's also, well, there's an NDA that says you can talk about it, but you can't talk about it. So I wanted to know just.
Wow. That's a good question.
Well, government NDAs are increasingly becoming unenforceable because the government itself cannot engage in tactics that seek to stifle your speech. So if I sign an NDA for my lawsuit while we're in mitigation, there's no way for them to enforce that.
They can do it again.
Only if a judge orders it for other reasons. But like an NDA, if they say you can't talk about this case again, I could say, okay, sure, yeah. They cannot enforce that.
Well, we definitely have the attorney in the back of the room who we might be able to ask you about. So if you did sign an NDA or a gag order, how then, is there certain ways you could still talk to the media? I think is the question. Are there ways sort of around that?
Well, part of it will depend on the wording of the paragraph or many paragraphs. Oftentimes, if it's done by a good defense firm, the answer is likely no. If you sign something like that as part of a settlement to resolve your situation, and part of the deal is you're not going to talk about this anymore, the language will be pretty tight. The only way you can typically get around that language, aside from the media, is, if there's a reason to dialogue further with regulators or law enforcement or something like that, even if the language is very broad, it's against public policy and they cannot prevent you from dialoguing in that way. But it is unfortunately a legitimate contract to say, I'm going to settle with you and you're going to agree that you're not talking to anybody in public about this again. And so part of the thing that we always go through in settlements is exactly this struggle, is how much does the client want to maintain of their ability to talk about the story further versus how much are they willing to trade for the enhanced value of a settlement and resolution. And for us, that's a client by client decision. That's just the way the individual has to decide for themselves how they're going to deal with that issue.
Christian, I think you wanted Lizak.
Yeah, I just, I guess this is more of a problem to contemplate, or maybe you guys have some insight. But I guess a roadblock that I see to owning one's narrative can be the eventual court decision that you get. And, when you deal with authority bias, belief in the just world fallacy and the complexity of the law, there's really no way to effectively argue against a bad decision. And I just to briefly kind of go into my own story just very quickly. I know whistleblowers have problems with info dumping sometimes. But I'm a whistleblower's son. One of my earliest memories is of our garage being burned down after CNN had run a story. It wasn't until I was older that I learned, that we were receiving death threats. Some of them mentioned me. And eventually we got to the Court of Appeals and they said, you have as much evidence as an appellant could hope to have. Sent it back down to the district court where it lamented for 10 years and most of the defendants died. And, my father had blown the whistle on his union, and eventually it ended up back in front of the Court of Appeals while he was running for president of the union. And the Court of Appeals said, you've never provided any evidence over the last 23 years. And, I think it's I think most people would think it's ridiculous to think a case can last for nearly a quarter century without any evidence. Now that's what this 270,000 member union thinks, is that there is no evidence, and there's really no way to kind of say the judges were wrong. These are the authority, And so I see, I want people to contemplate judicial reforms as far as what requirements there are for a decision, to what degree they're required to respond to your arguments, things like that. It is just they have such power to take away the narrative, and I just don't, even trying to talk to reporters about how are you going to convince them that the judges were wrong.
No, I mean, I think those are the great points. And then it takes me back to thinking about when I was talking the other day about the gaslighting. Gaslighting, whether it's through a very formal judicial process, or people telling you to forget about it, or don't think about that anymore, or you're mistaken, I never did anything wrong. That gaslighting tries to take away your agency, your self-efficacy, your ability to own your own narrative. So whether or not anybody is actually listening, except for maybe me and Christian and some of these other folks, you are believable to those of us who are listening. And I think that is probably the most important part of all of this, is at the end of the day, we have to know who we are, whether we publish books or make movies or do TV shows. I think the owning your narrative is an internal owning your narrative. It's being true to yourself. To thine own self be true, thou canst be false to any man. If you own your narrative, if you believe in your heart that you are doing the right thing, that you are a good person, that you are not wrong, that you have not misunderstood, if you believe that, then that's really all that matters at the end of the day. Any last words from any of our panelists? Absolutely.
When I was first arrested, I was charged with 3 counts of espionage for an interview I gave to ABC News and a subsequent interview to the New York Times. All 3 of those espionage counts were dropped. And they were dropped because my defense to them was very simple. It is a crime to classify a crime. We actually have a law in this country that says that if an element of the US government is committing a crime, it is illegal for them to classify the program for the purpose of keeping the information from the American people. And so NDA, wow, out the wazoo NDAs. They call them secrecy agreements. I didn't care because deep down, I knew I was right and they were wrong. And so in the end, at least that part of it worked out. That's what it came down to.
Yeah, the raid on my house resulted in 1 felony charge of misuse of computer systems, which 6 months after I was charged was ruled unconstitutional in the Van Buren versus U.S. Supreme Court case. It still took another 1.5 years for the state to dismiss the case. They held it over me for 2 years, knowing they never were going to go to trial. They'd never win a case like this. 2 years and $20,000 to get them to drop the case. So, I mean, but other people serve. Reality went to jail. Others have avoided it. We were lucky that we avoided it. Dan avoided it. If you know what you're doing is right, and especially if lives are on the line, and this is where I'm still a true whistleblower at heart. If people are going to die if you don't say anything, forget about the consequences. Can you live with that if you don't speak? That's what I struggled with those 5 days I was hiding. Can I live with myself if I don't say anything and he gets thousands of people killed? And I decided no, and he did it anyways. So the whole debate of whether or not it mattered, it didn't matter to me because I knew it was going to happen. And I felt people were entitled to the information to know that they knew it too. And that part I'd do over again, just maybe not at 30 and with no money and not knowing I was going to pay my bills. But some of this stuff that we deal with, there's financial fraud, there's other types of fraud, but a lot of it is people will die. And you really have to kind of look at yourself and say, can I live with that? Am I a part of this if I don't say anything, which is how I felt. And for me, that was an easy question to answer. How you deal with life afterwards, TBD.
All right, well, I want to thank this amazing panel as we come to the end of this amazing day. I'm going to ask if there's anybody out here who hasn't said anything that they want to say before I make a closing remark or two. Everybody's quiet, tired. So we made it. We made it through 2 days of talking about whistleblower retaliation, whistleblower law, the media. I think we've had a lot of chances to bond, hug, and support each other. And I think for me, that's what this small little organization, I always call it the little engine that could. We just chug along, nothing stops us, nothing gets in our way. We couldn't have done this though today without two very important people to me. I think they know who they are. One of them's already standing, anticipating that he's going to get a round of applause. The ever amazing Paul Pearson. He has solved every IT problem. I mean, I can turn on and off the computer. Half the time I don't even remember to do that. So Paul has really made all this happen today. And then the ever lovely, the so beautiful, smart, charming, lovely, big-hearted, with an amazing daughter who did amazing things this week as well, Christian Green. And then we have Joe Wade is on our board. He is sometimes the silent voice. And then all the sponsors that have helped us out to make this actually happen, so that we've had the lunches that we've had the space that we've had. Maharian Skelet is here, Richard Condit. I know Whistleblowers has been a big supporter. Jason Zuckerman, the National Coalition, the National Anti-Bullying Coalition. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I appreciate the people who traveled here overseas. Thank you, Ari, for being here from Greece. Maybe we'll do another one of these in Greece in the future. You can help us plan that. You'll be there, yeah. We got a planning committee going already. So thank you all. I love you. I appreciate you. I believe you. Oh, and our photographer, I don't know his name even. Joe.